Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
The Roswell event began on July the 1st, 1947, when a UFO was tracked on radar screens at Alamogordo, New Mexico, White Sands, and Roswell Air Force Base. The object's flight characteristics defied any known conventional aircraft, and the object was observed on radar until July the 4th at approximately 11:30 p.m., when it disappeared from the scopes. Many believe a flying saucer actually crashed near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947, and the government recovered the craft as well as alien bodies. From that moment till present, people have been in pursuit of the greatest story that could never be told. The Roswell incident is considered by many to be the most extraordinary close encounter of this century, and the Rosetta Stone of the UFO government cover-up. Numerous books, television shows, and even a feature film have been produced to explore the subject. In the beginning, the Air Force itself proclaimed they had recovered a crashed disc, but General Ramey, commanding general of the 8th Air Force, recanted the story. The story disappeared for over 45 years. In the 70s, nuclear physicist and UFO researcher Stanton Friedman began talking to witnesses who had been on the scene. And over the years, Friedman and many other researchers, such as Bill Moore, Kevin Randall, have discovered over 250 witnesses directly connected with the Roswell incident. The Roswell story continues to develop, so here I present as completely as I can at this time a condensed look at the extraordinary events that took place near Roswell, New Mexico in the summer of 1947. Many people, both in town and nearby, see a strange blue-white object in the night sky near Roswell. Rancher Mac Brazel hears a loud explosion during a thunderstorm late that evening. He said the explosion sounded much different than the thunder itself. Mac Brazel, accompanied by a 7-year-old, Timothy Proctor, discovered a strange, unearthly material scattered over 3/4 of a mile on his ranch. The first debris field of 2 did not include any alien bodies or the main section of the craft. Brazel loaded some of the material in his pickup truck and drove it to his neighbors, Floyd and Loretta Proctor, and showed them pieces of the strange material. At the second debris field, a small group of archaeologists happened upon the crashed intact saucer and bodies. They and members of the Roswell Fire and Police Department are among the first civilians to view the site. The military then arrive a short time later and escort the civilians off the site while securing the area. One alien is reported to have still been alive and walking around the crashed disc. The crash site now secure, the alien bodies are placed in body bags and taken to the Roswell Base Hospital by ambulance for preliminary examination. The surviving alien is also taken into custody. Only individuals with the highest security clearances are allowed near the site. Ballard Funeral Home mortician Glenn Dennis of Roswell receives a phone call from the Roswell Base Mortuary. Dennis is asked questions about the best ways to preserve bodies that have been exposed to the elements, and he's also asked if he has any hermetically sealed, child-sized coffins available. In addition, military bases all over the West Coast have interceptors specially equipped with gun cameras, and they are now on alert for unidentified flying objects. Mac Brazel shows Roswell Sheriff George A. Wilcox some small pieces of the wreckage. Wilcox, excited, calls the Roswell Army Airfield. Air Intelligence Officer Jesse Marcel and Senior Counterintelligence Agent Sheridan Cavett arrive to inspect the wreckage. The commanding officer of the 509th Bomb Group, Colonel William Blanchard, collects the material from Sheriff Wilcox, has it sent to Colonel Thomas J. Dubose and Colonel Alan D. Clark at the Fort Worth Army Airfield. They then ship the material directly to Major General Clement McCullen in Washington, D.C. Early morning, July the 7th, 1947, alien bodies and parts of the crashed disc are flown to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. Officers Marcel and Cavett accompany Mac Brazel to the debris field. which is over 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. They fill Marcel's staff car and Cabot's Jeep with some of the debris for transport back to the base. Glenn Dennis meets his friend, a nurse at the Roswell Officers Club. She is visibly shaken and very upset. She tells Dennis that she witnessed doctors she had never seen at the base before examining 3 alien bodies, and she drew a sketch of one of them for him on a napkin. She gave Dennis details of their physical description and said they were not human, but were foreign bodies. On his way back to the airfield, Jesse Marcel stops by his home at 2 a.m. and shows pieces of the strange wreckage to his wife and son. He tells them it is wreckage from a flying saucer. At about 2 p.m., Colonel Blanchard at Roswell Army Air Force Base orders Public Information Officer Walter Haught of the 509th Bomb Group to issue a press release saying that the Army had found the remains of a crashed flying saucer. The story went out over the news wires to radio stations and newspapers. Calls began coming into Roswell from all over the world. Within 2 hours, General Clements McMullen in Washington phones Colonel Thomas Dubose in Fort Worth. McMullen orders Dubose to tell the Chief of Staff to the 8th Air Force Commander, General Roger Ramey, to kill the flying saucer story and create a cover story. Later, General Ramey stages a press conference at 8th Air Force Headquarters in Fort Worth. He announces that what had crashed near Roswell was a weather balloon and not a flying saucer. Meantime, at radio station KGFL, an interview with Mac Brazel is canceled by direct orders of the Federal Communications Commission and the New Mexico congressional delegation, who warned that the station had 24 hours to find something else to broadcast or to be out of the radio business. The remaining debris is then removed from both crash sites and taken to the Roswell Army Air Force Base. At approximately 7:30 p.m., the Associated Press issues a worldwide bulletin that the saucer story is just a weather balloon. ABC News also reports that the Roswell wreckage is only a weather balloon. In the following weeks, witnesses would be threatened, special flights would be diverted, files would be destroyed, officers were reassigned, and the cover-up began. It would be nearly 45 years before witnesses spoke openly about the event again. Many years later, Inez Wilcox, wife of Sheriff George Wilcox, tells her granddaughter, Barbara Duggar, that the family had received death threats to keep them from speaking about the Roswell incident. In 1978, Major Jesse Marcel speaks to researchers and the news media, saying that the wreckage he saw was not of this earth. Jesse Marcel Jr. goes public, saying the material his dad was ordered to pose for press pictures with was not the same material he had showed them that late night. Mortician Glenn Dennis was told by military officers, "If you speak about this, someone will be picking your bones out of the desert." Glenn Dennis's nurse friend then disappeared and was killed in a plane crash. General Thomas Dubose admitted in later years that the entire weather balloon story was a cover-up and had been given orders from General McMullen to forget the whole incident. Many other civilians were threatened with imprisonment or death, and military personnel were reminded of their oaths. Very extreme behavior to account for a weather balloon.
Somebody in the press had found out that something had been scooped up out that, and I don't know whether it's McMullen or Calbear or who, somebody cooked up the idea. As a cover story, we use this weather balloon. I knew what we were told to do about the other material, and that wasn't going to be discussed under any circumstances. At the minute that McMullen told me, "You are not to discuss this is more than top secret," as he said. It's beyond that. It's within my priority as deputy to George Kenney, and he in turn responsible to the president. This is the highest priority you can exist, and you will say nothing. And Jesus, that's from the commander-in-chief, and you forgot about it.
On January the 12th, 1994, at the overwhelming request of constituents, United States Congressman Stephen Schiff of Albuquerque, New Mexico, contacted the Department of Defense and requested any information it had on the Roswell incident of 1947. The Department of Defense stated it didn't have any information and referred Schiff to the National Archives. Schiff, after being told by the National Archives that they had no records, stated to the press that he found the Department of Defense's lack of response astounding and that he had been stonewalled by the Department of Defense when requesting information regarding the Roswell incident. Investigating further, Schiff contacted the General Accounting Office to request a records audit related to the 1947 events. On July the 28th, 1995, the GAO completed its investigation and released a report stating that all outgoing messages from the Roswell Army Airfield for this period of time had been destroyed without proper authority. Actually, records for an entire 5-year period had disappeared. Schiff pointed out that these messages were crucial and would have shown how military officials in Roswell explained to their superiors exactly how officers of the only nuclear strike force on the planet couldn't tell the difference from a weather balloon and an advanced spacecraft made of exotic materials from another world. In September 1994, 8 months after Congressman Schiff began his investigation, the Air Force made its first major public statement related to UFOs after over 25 years of silence on the matter. The report stated that the Air Force had indeed misled the American people and the world about the weather balloon story in 1947. It also stated that the debris found by rancher Mac Brazel was in fact a remnant of a different balloon flight, launched as part of a top-secret program called Project Mogul. So now, which Air Force lie are we supposed to believe?
The farmer called that saw this mound of debris. He is out in the sticks, you understand. There's no within 100 miles, no village or anything. And the farmer that saw this was smart enough to know that it was beyond his capabilities to know what this mound was. And he had somebody get in touch with Roswell. Well, Butch sent this fellow, you mentioned his name.
Marcel.
Yeah, out to look at it, and he scooped it up and put it in this bag and brought it back to Roswell. And then by this time, when McMullen found out and told me to get the goddamn stuff and bring it to him on Western. There wasn't much time elapsed, as I recall, between the time this first came into our attention and that this major went out and scooped it up and put it in the bag. That went direct to Blanchard, and from Blanchard into Fort Worth and into Western. That took less than 48 hours, that interval of time.
There's no doubt in your mind, I gather, that the balloon story was a cover story.
Absolutely none. We knew that it was a cover story, and whose idea it was, I haven't the vaguest idea, but we used that in order to assuage the curiosity of the press, because this had gotten out in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Dallas News, and the UPI. And
well, the press release from Roswell, Blanchard's press release.
Yeah, there are all these pictures, but the weather balloon is the same as hundreds of them, all the same. And it was a story that we could tell with some straight face.
Basically, I got a phone call from Colonel Blanchard, and he pretty much dictated, not all the verbiage, but it hit the salient points, telling me about the flying disc that we assumedly had pieces of, and who had gone and gotten it, and what was being done with it. And I wrote the release from the information that he gave me over the telephone.
He had been humiliated and detained for several days, and he was a reliable, solid person, dependable. And the time that he brought the sample of what he had picked up, he was at the corral. My daughter and 2 sons and husband were at the corral, and they saw it. My daughter says that it could be crumpled up and straightened right back out. And I talked to her on the telephone a couple of nights ago, and she repeated the same thing. He was telling my family about how badly the Army people had treated him down here. And it amounted to humiliation and detention when there wasn't any good reason. He had come in good faith, and they didn't accept it that way, or didn't appear to. He said they threw him in jail. I don't know which jail. Anyway, they didn't let him go home. He said if he ever found anything like that again, he would never show it to them. He would never bring it in. He had done so as what he thought was a good citizen, and he had been humiliated and mistreated, and he was very disturbed.
In 1947, I think it was about the 1st of July, and he came over with some something that looked like wood that he had found on the ranch and wanted us to go look at it. And we didn't have the time or means to go do it, and we talked him into taking it to Roswell and showing him down there, and they brought him back to find where it was at, and then took him back down there and kept him several days in Roswell while they cleaned up everything. And when he came back, he said they told him it was a weather balloon. If he ever found another, and he wouldn't report it. And we didn't see any of the tinfoil-looking stuff that he described, or the beams with the purplish writing on it. But the piece he brought up was about the size of a lead pencil, and about 4 inches long, 4 or 5 inches long, and it was kind of a tan color, kind of like what we'd say plastic now, but we didn't have plastic then, and you couldn't cut it or burn it or whittle it, just very, very hard. I can't remember what shape it was broke in, whether it was a jagged break or straight break. It was very light, it seemed to be, and he said that the stuff that looked kind of like aluminum foil, he said you'd crumble it up and then it'd straighten out. It wouldn't stay creased, it'd just open out. But he couldn't get any of it off to bring up. He said he couldn't cut it or anything.
My father was Sheriff George Wilcox in July of 1947 when the flying saucer UFO incident occurred. He told me that Brazel had been in to report a flying saucer, and I asked him if he believed that, and he said yes, because I don't know why he would come into my office and tell me this story for no reason at all. He had some material with him, he said, which I did not know what it was. He said that he had sent some deputies out there and they had seen some things. They had seen a corral that had some of the material in it, and they had seen a large burnt spot on some grass about the size of a football field. And he wanted to send them back again or go and investigate it more, but when he did, the Air Force had it blocked off. My mother told me years later that the Air Force asked them not to say anything at all about what had happened, and they changed the story that the paper had put out originally to say that what had been found was a weather balloon. She said that there were bodies and an unidentified flying object on the ground. There were bodies too, but that they stopped the investigation that the sheriff's office was going to do because the Air Force wanted them to.